Welcome to episode 328 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agent Tom Blades, who served in the FBI for 34 years, and retired Homeland Security Investigations HSI agent Jim Weber, who served in the Department of Homeland Security for 22 years. In this episode, Tom Blades and Jim Weber review an undercover case involving a member of the Zetas Mexican drug cartel who wanted to hire someone to kidnap, torture, and murder a drug rival and his daughter as an act of retaliation. Jim went undercover as a biker willing to accept the murder-for-hire assignment, and Tom posed as his associate. At the time of the investigation, Tom supervised the FBI Safe Streets Task Force in St. Louis, Missouri, and Jim was a task force officer, TFO, assigned to the task force. As a field investigator, Tom Blades conducted numerous investigations for 32 years of his 34-year career. He also operated in an undercover capacity in a variety of domestic and international cases. As a supervisor, Tom managed a multi-agency task force made up of over 50 FBI agents and task force officers targeting drug trafficking organizations. Additionally, Tom was the evidence response team supervisor and the undercover coordinator for the St. Louis office. Tom is the recipient of multiple Distinguished Service Awards from the U.S. Attorney's Office and 2 Federal Executive Awards for team excellence. Tom is currently affiliated with Streetwise 360, Law Enforcement Instruction and Media Consulting, while working as a special agent with Homeland Security Investigations. Jim Weber worked as a TFO task force officer with the FBI for 12 years on the Violent Crime Safe Streets Task Force and the Joint Terrorism Task Force, as both a case agent and as an undercover operative. He is also a certified gang specialist with extensive training and experience focusing on the crimes and violent activities of outlaw motorcycle gangs, prison gangs, and street gangs. Currently, he's a professor of criminal justice and a law enforcement academy instructor at a community college outside of St. Louis, Missouri. He is the founder and owner of Streetwise 360, Law Enforcement Instruction and Media Consulting. His company currently provides specialized law enforcement training on topics such as confidential informant development, prison gangs, transnational gangs, narcotics investigations, and long and short-term undercover operations. Jim recently launched and now hosts a pro-law enforcement themed podcast, The Right to Remain Silent. Each episode has a detailed discussion and conversation with both current and retired law enforcement officers and military personnel. There's a link to the Right to Remain Silent podcast in the episode show notes at jerrywilliams.com. In your podcast app's description of this episode, you'll find a link where you can join my reader team, where I talk about crime fiction, and you can learn more about the FBI and books, TV, and movies. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, retired FBI agent Tom Blades, and retired U.S. Department of Homeland Security Investigations, HSI agent Jim Weber. Hey guys, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Great, thank you.
I love it when I have the opportunity to not only speak about an FBI investigation with one of the case agents or a supervisor, but also with one of our law enforcement partners, because I do cliches about the FBI. And one of the biggest cliches, the one that I really hate, is that we don't play well with others. And so when I have an opportunity to show how the task force concept works and how we work so well together, I jump on it. So thank you both for agreeing to come on today and present this case review.
Very welcome.
Absolutely.
All right, so I'm going to set this up a little bit. At the time of this particular case, Tom was the supervisor of a violent gangs and drug squad in St. Louis, Missouri, and you also managed a multi agency task force.
That's correct, yes.
And Jim, coming from HSI, was a task force officer, a TFO, and also an undercover agent working this case. Is that correct, Jim?
It sure was.
All right, so this is going to be really interesting as you both talk about this particular case and the different roles each of you played as the supervisor and as the undercover agent. But before we start, Tom, if you could talk a little bit more about what a violent crime safe streets task force, what that means and how you all work together.
Yes, we had a large task force in St. Louis. We had officers from a myriad of different departments at state, local, and federal levels, and we all came together under one roof and would work cases jointly. They would come into our office and hand out leads, working basically 7 days a week at times on these cases, because like this case, as you'll hear, some of the information that came in was not something that could be set aside and dealt with later. It was something that had to be dealt with almost immediately because there was violence involved and there could be victims involved. So case would come in. As a supervisor, I would assign the case to an FBI agent along with usually partners, and they would work that case together, and then they would draw from the larger pool to assist them in surveillances, arrests, search warrants, and that kind of thing.
In addition to Jim representing the Homeland Security investigation side, who else was on the task force? What other agencies?
Well, we had agencies we worked with DEA, we worked with St. Louis City, St. Louis County, St. Charles, quite a few of them. And oftentimes some of those departments would rotate in and out. And even if an agent wasn't on the task force, we still might go to them. Like, for example, ATF, if there was a case that we thought we could work with them jointly, we would reach out to the agency and see if we could use one of their agents for part of our investigations. We did branch out quite a bit. St. Louis obviously is a large area, and then when you go out to St. Louis County and beyond, you're talking a large geographical area of coverage. So we did oftentimes offer invitations to other departments to either join the task force or if they could simply work the case with us for one particular case for its duration.
Very good. Who wants to start the case review?
I'll start it off. I was very fortunate in this case, not only being the supervisor, but also working in an undercover capacity with Jim on several meets. I was what you would call the secondary undercover, and Jim would be called the primary undercover. I'm certified as an undercover, both face-to-face and online, and have worked undercover off and on for over 30 years. So it was very nice to be able to wear both hats in this investigation. But as a supervisor, my duties were to make sure any ops plans that were submitted for this case and any cases on the task force were not only safe for all those involved, but that it would also move that investigation forward. And I also approved monetary requests, which usually came in the form of money for the purchase of evidence, such as drugs or weapons. But this case we're talking about today was much more than a drug investigation. True, it involved kilogram quantities of methamphetamine and heroin, but it also involved a plot to kidnap, torture, and murder multiple individuals, namely a drug rival and their child, as an act of retaliation. Beginning in early May 2013, our office received information from a confidential informant, which I'll refer to as a CI, that an individual later identified as Bomaro Rodriguez Yegas, whom I'll refer to as Bomaro, was connected to the Mexican mafia and was in the St. Louis area to expand his drug distribution network. Initial investigation determined Bomaro would drive from Missouri to Texas to pick up methamphetamine and heroin, and that he was actually associated with the Los Zetas drug cartel from Mexico, not the Mexican mafia. And then the subsequent investigation determined Bomaro was in fact a member of the Los Zetas drug cartel. During this investigation, the CI told us that Bomaro had required them to provide a photograph of themselves and an address. Bomaro told the CI this information would be forwarded to Bomaro's Los Zetas source of supply in Mexico, and that should anything come back on the cartel, they had a squad that the cartel would send out, and they would hunt the CI down and kill him. So throughout the month of May, numerous surveillances were conducted by our agents on the squad to further identify Bomaro and other associates, including his girlfriend, Kimberly Soest. So in early May, a controlled drug buy was conducted. The first one between the CI and Bomaro, 3 ounces of methamphetamine. During that deal, Bomaro said he had recently traveled to Texas and had picked up a load of methamphetamine from his Las Zetas source of supply and could now sell between 10 and 20 kilos of methamphetamine, as well as a substantial quantity of heroin. So we move on along to May 21st of that same year, 2013, and a second controlled purchase takes place for 1 ounce of meth, and it all goes smoothly. In mid-June, intel is received that Bomaro was planning to travel to Texas to pick up 2 kilos of meth. Investigation determined Bomaro would be accompanied by another individual that we later identified as Joe Pitts, Pitts. The plan was to pick up the meth and transport it to Atlanta, where it would be sold. However, the CI was later told by Bomaro that he was robbed at gunpoint of the 2 kilos by a masked man during a drug deal in Atlanta. Bomaro believed he knew who robbed him and instructed the CI to find someone to do a retaliation kidnapping of the man and kidnap his daughter as well. The CI told Bomaro he knew some bikers that might be interested. So, Interstage Right, Jim, and myself.
Was this true that the CI was robbed, or did you just say that in order for him not to have to hand the drugs over?
No, it was actually Bomaro who told the CI that Bomaro had been robbed. Bomaro was in Atlanta when he picked up the meth with Joe Pitts. They'd taken it to Atlanta to sell it, and while in Atlanta conducting a drug deal, Bomaro said he was robbed at gunpoint by a masked man whom he believed he knew. So Bomaro tells the CI, I need you to find someone who can take care of this person. And that meant to kidnap them, torture them, and murder them, also including this person's daughter. He wanted them both taken. His plan was to kidnap and demand a $120,000 ransom, and once paid, he was going to murder both of them. And he wanted this done within the next couple of weeks. So as you all know, Jerry, being an FBI agent, when you have a hard time like that, a lot has to be done very quickly. Many scenarios were then discussed on how to stall for time. So Bomaro wanted it done in the next couple of weeks and also had associates in Atlanta looking for the same individual. So not only did Bomaro tell the CI to find someone in St. Louis to do the kidnapping, he also had his own people in Atlanta looking for this individual. So that upped the ante, setting a kind of a hard date. It made it very challenging for investigators. So they had to sit down and come up with a number of scenarios for the CI and in the future for the UC, for Jim, to discuss on how to stall this violent act from happening and to buy more time. So we are now moving into the first week of July. And Jim, our primary UC, is going to be introduced as one of the bikers. So at this point, I'll turn this over to Jim.
Sure. There was a lot going on here, a lot of moving parts in this scenario here, like Tom said. And one of the things I wanted to do was just briefly for your listeners, Jerry, that aren't really familiar with the Zetas cartel, or it's oftentimes pronounced Setas or Zetas. I just briefly wanted to kind of mention a little bit about them. It's a very powerful drug trafficking organization that operates out of Mexico, and it funnels thousands and thousands of kilos of cocaine, marijuana, methamphetamine, fentanyl, all these narcotics into the U.S. each year. And they're one of the largest, most violent drug cartels that operate in Mexico today. And they influence various regions around the world. Specifically, they have quite a stronghold through Central America and Mexico and up into numerous cities here in the United States. And the way the Zetas started out was they were actually originally enforcers for the Gulf cartel. So these Zetas were former Mexican military, former Mexican law enforcement that went rogue. So they had all this various type of training. So they were essentially the enforcers for the Gulf cartel. They did this for some amount of time. And at some point, the Zetas are like, hey, we can do this. We can do what the Gulf cartel's doing, and we can do it better. So they broke off and actually started to operate independently from the Gulf cartel. So they established themselves as their own cartel. And it was such a significant maneuver that back in 2009, President Obama identified this organization as a significant foreign narcotics trafficking organization under the Kingpin Act. So they're very substantial. And I just wanted to mention that of who we're now dealing with here. So as Tom said, they're using a CI to gather this information. They're utilizing the CI to make controlled purchases of methamphetamine. And they're pretty good quantities. I mean, they start out with 3 ounces. That's not, just a gram or an 8-ball, something along those lines, but that's a pretty good quantity to start off with. So the CI he's interacting with Bolmaro. Bolmaro is furious about being robbed in Atlanta of these 2 kilos. So he wants something done about it. So like Tom said, that's where I come in here. CI sets up a meeting for myself and Bolmaro, and we meet at an area restaurant. This is the first time Bolmaro and I meet face to face. We sit down at a table and we talk for a significant amount of time, close to 2 hours, both inside the business and outside the business. And it's difficult communicating with him because he speaks broken English, but he communicates good enough, as we'll see in the phone calls that we're going to listen to here later. But we communicate, and he instantly relays his anger about what happened to him and his desire to conduct this kidnapping of multiple people. He tells me who he believes did it. He's gathering phone numbers. Like Tom said, he's got boots on the ground in Atlanta, scouring for all the information they can to forward to me in order to be able to conduct this kidnapping. And he didn't just want to kidnap them. He wanted to kidnap them. And he specifically wanted them transported in like a U-Haul truck. And he wanted them transported to a location and held in a basement for an indefinite period of time, depriving them of food and water and of sleep. And he wanted to torture these individuals. He referenced to me that he wanted me to hold these people in a basement type of setting or a warehouse type of setting. And then he would arrive and extract his revenge. And he specifically discussed utilizing tools such as pliers, where he wanted to break out teeth of not only the individual that he believed robbed him, but the family members of the individual that robbed him. He wanted to pull fingernails. He wanted to pull teeth. He wanted to torture them, hold them for ransom, get that chunk of money, and then dispose of them by murdering them. So that's the type of guy we're dealing with.
Jim, I have to ask you this. If he's a member of the Zeta cartel that used to be enforcers, why can't they do it? Why do they need you?
Exactly. That is a great question. And that I asked him that specifically. I'm like, if you guys are so tough, why do you need somebody to do your dirty work? And his answer to me was that he wanted a degree of separation from this occurring. He said he could easily do it. He could easily have his people travel up from Mexico and execute this plan, but he wanted a degree of separation, is the explanation that he provided to me. And, we went with that. So that's kind of how we operated here is as soon as he relayed this information to us, it's one thing for him to tell the CI and the CI relays it to us, but for him to sit down, we make eye-to-eye contact, face-to-face communication, and he relays this to me. I'm like, this guy's serious. This is some serious stuff here. So in addition to conversations that we have here beginning of July, I think it was July 1st, July 3rd, in that time frame of 2013, we also discuss his narcotics distribution network. He had actually bounced from the Atlanta area up further into the United States and established a drug distribution network here, and he was looking to expand it. So in addition to a relationship with him, working with him to locate, kidnap, and torture these folks, he also wanted to sell me drugs. So we went ahead and agreed to do that as well. So as this investigation progressed, we're communicating with one another about the details of the kidnapping. And we're talking about narcotics distribution and purchasing. So that's how it's starting and moving along here in the beginning of July here. So as we progress, at the conclusion of this initial meeting, he hands me a little homemade business card. And, it looks like you just print it yourself on your home computer. And on that business card, he has the name Bolmar Villegas and a phone number. And he told me that's how I should contact him. So that's the number I used to contact him from that point forward. What we did additionally was I took that card, and being with HSI, we routinely deal with immigration issues, and we have multiple immigration databases. So I just queried that name that he printed on his business card, Bolmar Villegas, and boom, a name pops up, Bolmar Villegas Rodriguez. We pull his alien file or his immigration file, and it contains records of previous removals or deportations from the United States. But also in that file is a series of photographs. So I look at those photographs and recognize, okay, this is the individual that I'm dealing with here. This is who I met with. So at that point, we've identified him right out of the gate as Bulmar Viegas Rodriguez. So we've got a little bit of information about him now. So we move on. And as it
I had to stop you because this seems so amateurish on his part. First of all, he's reaching outside of his cartel to find someone to do this. He's giving you his true identity.
Right. It took me aback there for a bit. And I think, I don't know this exactly, but my interpretation of this was he took that business card and he put a name on there because the informant kept providing us the name initially Omar, before we fully identified it. And he provides us with that business card that says Bolmar, like B is in Bravo, Ulmar. And he puts only a portion of his last name. So I think that he thought he was being sneaky by not putting his real name on this card and kind of operating that manner. But I would agree that that's pretty amateur for an individual to do that. But I don't think he realized the capabilities that we had, run that name in a essentially it runs a Soundex check as well. So it hit off all these variations of the name. And that's how we ended up identifying that full name and identity and pulling those files out of there. But Jerry, I would agree with you. That is somewhat amateurish. And I think it will become a little bit more clear as we talk about this more. Bomaro was a drug addict. And not only was he selling his product, but he was utilizing it. And as we progressed through this investigation, his behavior became more and more erratic and unpredictable. So the choices he made, the decisions he did, weren't he didn't have a sound mind when he was doing this because he was under the influence of these narcotics here. So I think that, those couple examples are kind of explain in a way why he did that. And what appears to be kind of an amateurish approach to things, I personally believe it was due to the narcotics that he was consuming. And I'll talk about it a little bit later. In one of the meetings with him where I'm purchasing from him, he tells me, "Hey, I've been up all night for the past 28 hours. I was using meth, heroin, weed, and alcohol. So this is the kind of guy we're dealing with here." So his decision making isn't clearly thought out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But my next question then is he trusting you or is he trusting the CI in deciding to go ahead and use you?
He's doing both. As we'll talk about here, he's extremely skeptical throughout this entire investigation. He outwardly makes remarks of, "Hey, I think that guy's a cop," or "I think the CI's working with the police," or "he's a snitch." He even accuses his own live-in girlfriend that does his drugs, that he supplies her, as being a snitch to the police. So he is living in this paranoia fueled, drug fueled world here. But initially, he is trusting, he's putting some trust into the informant that he knows. And in addition, he's kind of taken a little chance there and putting the trust in me as well to answer your question there, if that makes sense.
And who does he think you are again?
He thinks I'm an associate of the informant, and he thinks that I'm affiliated with a 1%, like a motorcycle gang, an outlaw motorcycle gang. I never outwardly told him, "Hey, I'm a member of the Hells Angels," or "I'm a member of the Mongols Motorcycle Club," but it was insinuated that I was a member of this type of organization that had ties to this group and the criminal activities that they are involved in. So that's what he's operating under. And at the time of the investigation, I looked the part. I was rough. I had, the long beard, the long hair, the tattoos. To several of the drug transactions and meetings, we actually would go to and from these meetings on a Harley motorcycle. So we went to great lengths to put that perception or that persona out there. And we believe he bought off on it because although he was saying these things, "Hey, I'm not quite sure about this guy," or "I'm not sure about this informant," he's selling me large quantities, kilo quantities of pure meth out of Mexico. It was 99.9% purity levels tested at the DEA labs. So he put the trust, although he was displaying skepticism, he went all in.
All right, let me ask you a supervisory type question, Tom. You know he's paranoid, you know he's taking drugs, you know he wants this done. What are you doing as the rest of the task force, first of all, to make sure Jim is safe and to make sure that Balmoro is not also talking to someone else about doing this job?
Well, that was definitely a concern of mine as a supervisor. We met with the powers that be in the front office, discussed it at length, and the decision was that I, who am also a certified undercover, would do some secondary undercover work with Jim and accompany him on some of the deals, basically to make sure things went smoothly, that we'd have at least two bodies on site, and then we would be surrounded with agents on the perimeter. So we never went out without more than probably a dozen, at least a dozen, if not more, agents in the very near vicinity. Always had communications running so we could hear what was going on to ensure there was safety. There were code words that would be used or said if something appeared or was not going the way it should be. And if that code word was uttered, then basically the operation, that scenario would be over. We would come rushing in to afford a rescue and extraction. So yes, it was very concerning because Bomaro was becoming very erratic, and there'd be times where he'd tell the CI, like Jim mentioned, "Hey, I think the guy's a cop. I think he's a snitch," but he still would deal with Jim and sell him drugs, talk about the plot for the kidnapping and for the murders. So it was very much a back and forth. So there was no real consistency again because of his drug use and alcohol abuse. So yes, that was what we did. We had to take steps, and we were very concerned that and we had agents in Atlanta that were doing the same thing, they were coming looking for any activity that might indicate that Bomaro's people out there were or had in fact found somebody to commit the same kind of acts that Jim was pretending that he was willing to commit, but they would commit it for real in Atlanta. So yeah, there were a lot of days where they were melancholy. We had a lot of meetings, a lot of scenarios were run by each other and with Atlanta powers that be, to make sure that everything was being done that could be done to safeguard those that could be involved in any kind of kidnapping or violent act.
What kind of verification was done either by St. Louis or by Atlanta to even verify that this target had indeed robbed Balmoro of his drugs? Did he have the right person? It sounded like he was kind of guessing as to who robbed him.
Jim, do you want to speak to that?
Sure, absolutely. At one point here in the investigation, Bolmaro puts me in contact with an individual from Atlanta. We speak by phone a handful of times. That individual is doing the footwork for Bolmaro, trying to locate who they believe was the perpetrator in the robbery. There was never a police report, anything along those lines that said, hey, Bolmaro Dieguez Rodriguez was robbed on this date in this location, where there was anything documented along those lines. But what we did was to, in our efforts to verify that this occurred, is speak to other individuals. And the other individuals, the person in Atlanta who indicated, yes, this guy is a drug dealer. He is a individual that deals large quantities of methamphetamine. He is known to rob individuals as well as part of his MO as a drug dealer down here in this region. So, and that's the best we could do at that point, is trying to verify, hey, did this really happen? And, is this worth pursuing? After having a number of conversations with this individual throughout the investigation, we felt confident that the individual that was ultimately identified was involved in robbing Bolmaro, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's a strange situation. You have a person that you're hoping to save his life. At the same time, he has committed a crime and he's a drug dealer and could potentially be a victim and a target.
You hit the nail on the head. The guy is a drug dealer. He's peddling poison on the streets. But on the flip side of that coin, you don't want anybody murdered, right? So we need to do what we can to the fullest extent to identify this person and absolutely prevent any type of act like that occurring.
I think a lot of people would be surprised, but you're right. That's the duty and the responsibility of law enforcement, is to protect life.
Absolutely. I've worked narcotics the majority of my career, and I have a big issue with drug dealers. It's a problem here in this country, but I don't want to see anybody murdered because of their involvement in committing those crimes. Punished, given an opportunity to go to trial, convicted and sentenced, that's one thing. Murder, that's a totally different thing.
Thank you for answering my question. So, where are we now in the investigation?
Where we're at here is it flows along here. It kind of intertwines in and out of this relationship of He wants to sell me narcotics. He wants to sell me this meth. He wants this kidnapping to occur. So there's this constant communication every day or every couple days and multiple meetings with him.
Jim, you sent me some audio, not just from meeting with him in person, but also talking on the phone. Can you go through and kind of introduce those audio clips?
So as the investigation progressed, there was, frequent communication between me as the undercover and Bull Morrow pertaining to drug transactions and the actual planning of the kidnapping. So there are a number of recorded phone calls where I'm communicating with Bull Morrow about, hey, let's meet up. I want to get some product from you. Where do you want to meet? How much is it going to cost? And we have basic conversations between one another about these topics here. So that's what you're going to hear when we listen to these phone calls.
Let's play some of those now.
This is HSI Undercover Agent 1919 SU. Today's date is Wednesday, July 3rd. It is 5:44 p.m. The following will be a meet with Omar at the Hooters restaurant in South County, St. Louis, Missouri.
Hey, what's up, my man? How are you? Hi. Long time no see. Too hard? What's up, man? How are you?
Well, I tell you what we'll do. When we walk outside, I want to get out of here. I don't want anybody to hear us talking. And I want to go outside and we'll talk a little bit more. So you guys tell me when you're ready to walk outside.
No, finish.
Finish it. Yeah, take your time. Let me think about it. What I can offer to you. What do I need to do? What do I need to do? We can talk right here.
Yeah, explain what.
Alright, so we got a couple weeks to figure this out.
Yeah,
You got a problem because somebody you and took your We need to go down to
We need
to go down to Georgia. Where are we going in Georgia?
We go to Lauderdale.
So I can plan mileage and gas and what all we need to do.
Sometime next week or in a couple weeks. Next week, in the middle of the week.
You want to go down there next week in the middle of the week?
No,
we'll talk.
when you're ready.
Okay.
When you guys ready.
Because I got a small crew that I work with. Only people that only I trust. And I want to talk to them. This is something we can do, and we've done this before. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to hold them? Do you want me to give them to you?
We're ready to hit to some leads.
You want me to fuck them up? What do you want me to do to them?
That's one of the things I gotta talk to my people over there to Mexico, this, because
here's what you do. You decide what you want to do, because I do everything.
okay.
If I just need to scoop somebody up and hand them to you, I can do that. If you want me to grab these people and get money from them, I can do that. We gotta kill these people? You just tell me what you need me to do, and we'll get it done.
That's fair. They don't pay.
They don't pay. They're gonna pay. They're gonna pay. How many people are we taking?
I told you there's only two.
The one that I need to find, he's Mexican. Write his name down. I'm gonna start looking into it. Why did he you up? Why did he do that? So tell me how this happened. Did you pull up there in the car and he gets in your car and he sticks a gun in your?
No. The first thing is this guy pull up, and I'm watching him.
So did somebody stick a gun on you?
Yeah.
We'll take care of that.
He was cruising me over, but he put me in big trouble.
I'll research it and see what we can do when we can do it. And then we can meet again and we can talk. Or we can talk on the phone, whatever you want to do.
That's good.
Does that sound good? Now, business is business. So I want to make sure I understand. If I'm going to do this, and I have my people do this, what do we get? What do I get?
120,000.
And how much of that is yours?
I gotta pay 50,000.
You're going to pay 50,000. Okay.
I'm happy to just pay what I owe.
And then after this, when it goes well, we can be in business?
Yeah, no, that's one of the number one.
I like that.
That's the number one.
I like that. What, can you give me anything in good faith before we do this, before we take a trip, or before we do this? Can you give me anything?
What I got right now She give you half ounce and less.
Half ounce of meth.
That's only what I got left right now.
You want me to call you tomorrow? You want me to call you tomorrow? You want my number? You want me to take your number? You tell me what you want to do. I can get you right here.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Sweet. We're going to do some business, my man. We take care of this, okay? We take care of this situation for you. And then you and I start working. How much quantity can you get? And I'm thinking in the future, do I got to pay up front for that stuff? Do I got to pay half?
You asking for like 2-3 kilos?
What do you sell me?
I'll give you good price.
All right, man, I'm going to get out of here. How about I got your number, I'll call you. You get your stuff together and we'll get together.
Or you can come straight up anytime before 1 to...
8 and 1 tomorrow? I'll see you again, man.
All right. Okay.
You're buying next time.
Yeah. It's on me next time.
All right. We'll see you guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Conversation's concluded. It is July 3rd at 7:42 p.m. I'm going to go ahead and deactivate.
Hello? Hey, it's Wes. What's going on, buddy? Hey, not much. How you doing? No, I'm doing great. Just get out of work, though. Yeah. You around tomorrow? Yeah, I'm off tomorrow. What do you want to do? You want to meet up? I can get two. Yeah. When? Now? I can do it tomorrow at noon. I could do it around noon or 1. Anytime after then. Do you got a blueprint with you? Yeah, I got stuff to bring to you. Oh, okay. So can you? I got all the papers. We can do it later now. We just go check to the office, and as soon as I get out of the office, I'll give you a call, and we can take care. Well, I'm out riding with my buddies right now. I don't want to get these guys. Oh, okay. We're out stopping at a few places. I don't want these dudes. I don't want to say anything to them. So I know I got everything I need, and I can do it tomorrow, probably around noon or 1. We can meet up, make it quick, or we can grab something to eat, whatever you want to do. I don't know if you want to talk anymore, or you just want to knock this out. No, just check this up, and then we make it meet later about the other stuff, the other work. Yeah. Okay. What time you like it tomorrow? Probably, we're bouncing around now. I could do it. It'd be best if I could do it at 1, but if that don't work for you, you tell me and we'll figure something out. No, I'll get out of the bed tomorrow by like 10 o'clock in the morning, so anytime, whatever, late to like 11 to on the rest of the day, we can take care of it. Okay. Let's do 1 o'clock if that'll work. Okay. Just give me a call and I'll take care of you. Okay. All right. We'll probably meet up around the same place or something. Or you tell me. I'll let you know. Okay. I'll call you tomorrow. Okay. See ya. Bye.
We eventually transitioned to not only am I meeting with Bolmaro, he involves his live-in girlfriend, who at the conclusion of this was an indicted co-conspirator in this whole thing. He brings her into the mix now. So now not only am I meeting and speaking with Bolmaro about his desire to commit this act, but his girlfriend, who coincidentally in previous meetings with me, he's accusing her of, hey, I think she might be a snitch or she might be an informant, but yet he's bringing her into the mix. So that shows you his thought process and his state of mind as we're progressing through this stuff here. So we're conducting this series of meetings. I'm buying quantities of meth from them. Again, the DEA lab is sending back results that this stuff's like 99.5, 99.9% pure. And Bolmaro claims it's from Mexico. So we're doing these drug buys. We're talking with Bolmaro, and the girlfriend is now giving her 2 cents worth. She actually, I recall a meeting one evening at a local restaurant where we sat on the patio of this restaurant. All these other customers and families were enjoying a nice meal. We're sitting there talking about kidnapping, torturing, and murdering people. And it was almost like Bizarro World sitting here with this couple whose desire is to murder somebody due to a drug ripoff here. Miss Soest starts to interject her opinion. Hey, I think you should do this, or I think you should rent this truck, or these types of things here. As these meetings are going, we're talking with Bolmaro, And at one point, I give him an opportunity to kind of back out of this. Hey, are you really sure you want to do this? Dude's down there in Atlanta. You're up here, living your life up here, running your business up here. Why do you even want to mess with that? Let's just move on and you can do your drug thing up here. But he was adamant. He was adamant that this needed to occur. So that's what we're doing here. We're consulting with Tom. We're consulting with the case agent. We're discussing the direction of this case. Well, if he wants to do this, we need to just quit talking about it. We have to have a substantial act on his part, which would consist of providing a down payment to me to secure my services in order to commit this act. So we deal with him, and he actually provides me ounce quantities of meth as down payment. He doesn't pay me cash, but rather he gives me drugs. So he actually commits a substantial act by giving us a down payment to commit this act. So that's where we're at. We're in July. All this stuff has occurred within a couple week time frame here. So we're now towards the end of July of 2013. We got multiple drug purchases. We're exceeding kilo quantities. We're talking about this kidnapping, torture, and all the while, as you've said, Jerry and Tom, hey, we got to keep this thing under control. And one thing I do want to mention is at some point, as this investigation is going on, the case agent worked towards obtaining a Title III wire intercept so we can actually listen to his communications to ensure, hey, this guy isn't hiring somebody else and cutting us out and going down there to do this. So we were able to eventually here listen to these calls to verify what he's telling me and to monitor and keep an eye on what he's actually doing and make sure that no one is kidnapped or tortured. So that's where we're at there. Once we get that down payment, he's really antsy to get this done. He's like, hey, we need to get this done next week. We need to get this done next week. And he's pushing for that. And not only is he talking about that, he's talking about, hey, I want to get a gun myself. So now we've got this drug user, drug dealer that's trying to get this done. He wants to get a gun. So we're trying to figure out, hey, we need to conclude this, but we need to make sure we have the elements of this crime because we don't want anything to slip through the cracks. So we're still working with this source, our CI, and he's feeding us information real time. In addition to me as the undercover talking and communicating with Bolaro, we have the CI that's also communicating to him and providing us information as well. So that's where we're getting the intel about, hey, he wants to get a gun, or today he's paranoid and he thinks you're a cop, or today he's good with you. He doesn't think you're a cop. So we're traveling down this road here still, and all the while purchasing drugs with him. And we're actually monitoring him. We're conducting surveillance of him as he travels out of state to get his product. He will tell the CI, hey, I'm going to cruise down to Texas and I'm going to pick up a couple kilos of meth. So we're able to actually conduct surveillance on him, multi-state surveillance to verify the things that he's saying that he's actually doing. So although he gave me a small amount of meth as the down payment for this kidnap, torture, murder, we want him to give us more of a down payment. So I'm communicating with him. Hey, man, yeah, that ounce was nice, but that's not going to cover what you want done here. So we eventually get him to provide us with more meth as more of a down payment to commit this act here. But as we're going on, he keeps transitioning. His drug use is erratic. One day he'll turn off all his cell phones. The next day he'll turn them back on. He'll go buy new cell phones. At a couple points, he actually moved out of his girlfriend's house that he had involved in this kidnapping plot. Then he would sell his vehicle. Then he would buy a new vehicle. He was paranoid. He was heavily using drugs. He would discuss, hey, I think the informant's a snitch, or I think this guy I'm dealing with is a cop. And he would tell his friends this, and they would laugh at him. We would get this information from our source. They would laugh at him and say, hey, man, you're using too much of your product. Those guys aren't cops. You're fine. An interesting little tidbit of information here that kind of helped to bolster my undercover persona was we actually met, Bolmaro and I met in a restaurant to conduct, I think it was a 3-ounce meth purchase. And in that restaurant, the restaurant owner looked at me as if he knew me. And so I was a little bit concerned at first, but come to find out later, that restaurant owner actually told Bolmaro, hey, I recognize that guy. He's a badass drug dealer. So he mistook me for somebody, relayed that to Bolmaro, but that actually bolstered my credibility in dealing with this guy. So I thought that was pretty funny. But we're still traveling down this road, a lot of moving parts here. He's traveling to Texas. to pick up his meth. He's bringing it back here. He's selling it to me. He's selling it to others. He's dropping phones. He's getting new phones. But he's still dead set on this kidnapping, torture, and murder. I met and purchased maybe 6 or 8 separate times from him, multi-kilo quantities. And all the while, his erratic behavior, mood swings, his admitted heavy drug use, his paranoia are all cause for alarm. At some point, towards the conclusion here, we decided, hey, we've got enough to prosecute him. And, in our communications with the assistant United States attorney, with the supervisors here involved and case agents and others, we decided, hey, I think we've got enough here collectively to shut this thing down. So towards the conclusion, we tried to get as much meth out of him as we can. And I think we set up one deal where it was 18 or 20 ounces, maybe close to half a kilo, somewhere in there, to get all the drugs we could from him before we arrested him. So we set up a deal. He actually fronted. For somebody that's so paranoid and occasionally accused the informant and myself of being police, he actually fronted a massive quantity of meth to me with the agreement that I would pay him back down the road. So securing enough evidence clearly for the drug distribution, securing enough evidence for the kidnapping. We have Bomaro. We have his girlfriend, Miss Sos. We have the individual in Atlanta doing the footwork. And we actually had a 4th individual from Atlanta get involved as well, providing information about kidnapping, also involved in drug distribution to me as well. This grew from an informant providing information about one guy selling drugs, and it morphed from that into a multi-person, multi-state drug distribution network that, because of that drug distribution network, morphed into a kidnapping murder for hire. So we checked all the boxes on what we needed to conclude this investigation. So as this is occurring, we're hearing Bomaro through the source, and I believe through the T3 intercept, that he's talking about bouncing down to Mexico temporarily. So we don't want him to slip through the cracks. So we start planning, coordinating when we're going to pick this guy up and how we're going to do it. So ultimately, the case agent and managers decide we're going to get arrest warrants for Bomaro and we're going to snatch him up, get him off the streets, and then we'll deal with Ms. Sost and others shortly after that. So the day comes where the FBI SWAT team is ready to execute the arrest warrant on Bomaro at his residence that he lives at with Ms. Sost. Well, the team gets there, and I actually tagged along in an unmarked car and just stayed out in the car to watch it unfold. And as the team gets to this residence, pulls up the street, there's cop cars everywhere. There's already police there at Bomaro's house. And this is like 4:30, 5 a.m., 5 in the morning. And everybody's like, what in the heck is going on here? Come to find out, late that night or early that morning, there was a confrontation, an argument between Bomaro and his live-in girlfriend, Miss Sos, and she called the police. The local sheriff's department responded to that residence and took Bomaro into custody for assault. He had assaulted Miss Sos. Well, what they determined is prior to the sheriff's department arriving there, during that confrontation and argument between the two of them, allegedly Miss Sos fired a handgun inside the residence at Bomaro during the heat of their argument. She didn't hit him. She actually fired into the door frame of the bedroom that they shared. So there was gunplay involved. Oh, it comes to a crazy conclusion. His behavior was so erratic and so crazy, and so was hers, because of Bomaro's drug use. And he told me in a number of conversations that I had with him about Ms. Sos was that she was a drug user as well. He was supplying her with methamphetamine and heroin. So she was a heavy drug user as well. So it fueled paranoia on both of their part. There's an assault and a gunfire in the residence before we even get there to take Bomaro into custody. As we got to that residence and sorted all those details out, Bomaro was already gone. The local sheriff's department had transported him away to the local jail, and he was being held on state charges there. The case agent broke away from the residence and went to the sheriff's department and went ahead and took Bomaro into federal custody based off that federal arrest warrant for the drug charges and the conspiracy to commit kidnapping. So the case agent is over at the sheriff's department dealing with Bomaro. We're at the house still Consent is obtained. There's a consent search done of the house with Miss Soest there, and she's denying everything. She's being interviewed, denying absolutely everything. She has no idea what anybody's talking about. So they decided, hey, let's bring in the undercover to sit down in the room and talk with her. At that point, I had a raid jacket on and came out of my undercover role, walked into the residence and sat down on the couch beside Miss Soest and said something to the effect of, hey, do you remember me? And I looked at her and she was visibly shaken. She clearly recognized me and knew that essentially it was up, but continued to deny everything. The consent search was concluded. She didn't share any information at that point. Bomaro was taken to his initial appearance, taken into custody with the Marshal Service. Within a day or a couple days, the others were taken into custody as well. Ms. Soest was taken into custody. She eventually, air quotes, cooperated, providing information. Joe Pitts from Atlanta, one of the individuals that was involved, he was taken into custody. The other individual from the Atlanta area that I spoke with that was doing the footwork for Bomaro, he was taken into custody as well on charges related to this case. So that's how it concluded.
I have a couple of questions. Tom, back to you as the supervisor. We always hear about deconfliction. So what happened as far as the sheriffs making the arrest at the house just as you were pulling up and no one knowing this was going to be happening? I would imagine that you had members of the sheriff's department on your task force.
We do, and unfortunately, there are times when you have a shots fired and you have a domestic assault that officers on the street are going to respond immediately. The call comes out, and with shots fired, there was no indication or there was no knowledge on their part that someone had not been shot and either wounded or killed. So as first responders, they were doing their job. But yes, it was surprising to the squad and to the SWAT team rolling up that they were on the street, having already effected the arrest of Bomaro and removed him from the situation, from the home. There are often times that the call made to the department is done on the way to the site as opposed to the day before or many hours before, and there are a lot of reasons that go into that decision being made. But yes, it was definitely surprising that that had happened. But again, I think it was more of the fact that you had shots fired and it was first responders on the street, more than likely very close in proximity, who responded to that. If a call comes in, there's been gunshot, I think that, again, there's not anything done to screen to see if there's any other activity coming in on that. We've got shots fired, respond immediately as first responders on the scene. So that's what we attributed to happening.
That makes a lot of sense. You had mentioned that you were also a certified UCA and that you occasionally met with Jim and the subject. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about the role that you played in those scenarios.
Certainly. And again, my role is when the source said he had some bikers, it was a plural term. I was mainly going as support as a secondary to make sure that everything was going smoothly with Jim in meeting with Bomaro. The meets I covered with Jim were more when we had information Bomaro was coming apart. His drug use had gotten worse. His use of alcohol had increased. The information we got from the CI was extremely important in this case. The CI was very close to Bomaro. Bomaro was confiding in the source frequently on a daily basis. And the source was then contacting the case agent, letting him know what Bomaro's demeanor is, letting him know what his travel plans were going to be about him possibly leaving the country. We had the Title III running as well. So we had a lot of things going on that would dictate Bomaro's behavior. We felt more confident and more comfortable not sending Jim in alone. As bikers, we played the part. We got on our Harleys, ride to the destination, the meet place, and I would just be more off to the side, keeping my eyes and ears open while Jim conducted the transaction with Bomaro.
The charges of these individuals, just to go over the specific charges, Bomaro was indicted for count 1, conspiracy to distribute methamphetamine, count 2, distribution of methamphetamine, and count 3, a kidnapping conspiracy. So those were his charges. In addition to that, when we originally identified him through his photo and his immigration files, we had determined that he was an illegal alien that was a prior deport. He had been removed from the country previously on a couple occasions. Ultimately, on those charges, he was sentenced to 270 months, just about, I want to say 22 years or so. and he was ordered removed or deported at the conclusion of serving that time. So that's how it ended up for him. And then when we talk about Miss Soest, what were the repercussions for her? Because she was involved in the drug transaction as well. She was charged with conspiracy to distribute methamphetamine. She was also charged with distribution of methamphetamine. And in addition to that, interstate transportation in aid of a racketeering enterprise as associated with the kidnapping aspect of this case. But interestingly enough, about Miss Soest, she was actually sentenced to 4 years of probation and 200 hours of community service.
Was her cooperation that substantial to justify that?
In my opinion, no. At that time, she actually had a teenage son, 14 years old or so. Her son had cancer. He had leukemia, and it was pretty serious, and he was going through treatments for the condition that he had. So that is the reason that the judge was lenient on sentencing Miss Soest. But as the case agent related to Tom and I afterwards, the judge was visibly upset with Miss Soest and her involvement in this case. And he made it very clear that she would have done substantial time had it not been for her son's serious medical condition. So that is the reason she got off so lightly, I would say. The third individual, Joseph Pitts, he was charged with conspiracy to distribute meth and the actual distribution. He wasn't actually charged with anything kidnapping related. But it ended up, he was sentenced to 33 months, which in my opinion is a minimal sentence. This individual had numerous serious health issues. And we believe that that was a key factor when it came to sentencing for him, his personal health situation. The fourth and last individual, Jose Cubera, the individual in Atlanta that was doing the footwork down there, he was actually charged with kidnapping conspiracy. But unfortunately, those charges were dismissed by the government. We didn't agree with that law enforcement wise. We felt that, hey, we did everything right to obtain what was needed and necessary to prosecute this guy. But the end game is that Bomaro was a bad guy, bad person. He was peddling some serious poison on the streets out there. And it was satisfying knowing we took him off those streets. Not only was he pushing drugs, but he wanted to commit dangerous, extremely violent acts. So collectively, as the law enforcement group that worked this, we were glad that he was taken off those streets and received a sentence like that. That's essentially how this thing concluded. It started out small and it took us in a direction that we really had not anticipated. But the end result was pretty satisfactory, I think, to myself and the co-case agents and everybody else that worked this case.
You initially went in trying to stop a kidnapping, torture, murder for hire situation. But as Jim was telling us, it became this drug investigation where now you were making more substantial buys and trying to, I take it, identify more people involved, the source of the drugs, all of that. Could you talk a little bit about that decision to expand the investigation?
Well, a lot of the drug buys were Bomaro wanting to sell his product, but we also wanted to continue the drug transaction relationship to stall for time. We had to have good reason to build in that window, that comfort zone, to do more identifying and to possibly, obviously, stave off any kind of action, especially in the part of Atlanta, if any of his people trying to carry out this kidnapping and violent act. It served two purposes. It obviously helped build a stronger case from the drug angle, but again, it also gave us more of a larger umbrella or more of a window of time, if you will, to fully address this potential kidnapping plot, torture, and murder. Because initially, he wanted it done within a matter of weeks. And he wanted this person taken. He wanted to come to the warehouse with his bag of tools, commit his torturous acts, demand a ransom, and then murder these two people, the drug rival and his daughter. Time is always critical in these cases, like anything where you have potential abduction, no matter what the violation is. Time is always extremely crucial in these cases to make sure everything goes safely of all parties involved. So that's what we are doing by the sales of the drugs were pivotal, building the case. but it also gave us a reason to continue dealing with Bomaro, with the UC and the CI, in order to do our homework behind the scenes.
This certainly was a fascinating case review. And I know I say the word fascinating all the time because I think most of the cases that we talk about here are fascinating to get a real clear understanding of what's going on behind the scenes as an investigation unfolds. So I want to thank you both for presenting this particular case review.
You're very welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, we're at the point where I like to learn a little bit more about my guests. So I'm going to ask my standard question. I'll start with you first, Jim, and ask you when and why you joined the Department of Homeland Security. What made you interested in being in federal law enforcement?
As a kid, I always had an interest in law enforcement. Never had any family or friends in it, but I always had this interest in it. Actually, I was a local sheriff's deputy. That's how I started my career. While doing that, I ended up getting to interact and work with federal law enforcement. I thought, hey, this is something that is for me. So I looked into it and I actually applied for the United States Customs Service. So I actually started my federal career as a special agent with the Customs Service. And this is pre 9/11 terrorist attack. So once those attacks occurred, the Department of Homeland Security was created. And this is in 2003. So what happened was the United States Customs Service was actually transitioned over under the newly created Department of Homeland Security. So they essentially did away with special agents of the U.S. Customs Service and then transitioned us to special agents with the Department of Homeland Security. So that's how I got involved in federal law enforcement.
And when did you retire and what are you doing now?
I retired 2 years ago, almost to the day. And in the past 2 years since I've retired, I am actually a professor of criminal justice and a law enforcement academy instructor at a community college just outside of St. Louis, Missouri. In addition to that, I founded a law enforcement instruction company called Streetwise 360, Law Enforcement Instruction and Media Consulting. And what we do is we instruct law enforcement specialty topics such as advanced undercover investigations, source recruitment and utilization, surveillance operations, street gang identification and investigation, and outlaw motorcycle gangs. In fact, Tom and I we're currently working together on an international aspect of providing training to various law enforcement partners overseas. And something I think I'm most proud of here in the past 2 years is recently I started and am the host of my own podcast called the Right to Remain Silent podcast, which is a pro law enforcement themed format, which I have to say was in parts inspired by you, Jerry. I became hooked on your podcast and I listened to them daily almost. So you were a great inspiration to me in starting. Basically, the format is a detailed discussion and conversation with law enforcement officers and military personnel where they discuss their most interesting or fascinating investigation or case or incidents. And so far, I've had some truly interesting guests to include a Navy SEAL Team 6 operator, the retired special agent that was actually shot in Mexico by the Zetas cartel, and his partner, Jaime Zapata, was also shot and murdered in that same incident. So we've got a number of fascinating guests. Again, Right to Remain Silent podcast. And I hope maybe folks that listen to your program might tune in and give it a listen.
Absolutely. Well, I will make sure to put a link to Streetwise 360 and to your podcast, The Right to Remain Silent, in the show notes for this episode. I always like to encourage people to start their own podcast, host their own podcast. Mine is a niche. I have to have a retired agent or retired FBI employee involved. And so I hear from people with some amazing stories from other agencies, whether it's Secret Service or DEA or from other countries, from Canada. I've heard from several law enforcement officers. And I always say, unfortunately, you can't come on my show, but I encourage you and I will do everything that I can to help you host your own podcast because I truly believe that these stories about law enforcement and how it really works helps the public to understand who we are and what we do. I support your podcast and hope people who like this show will give it a listen.
I greatly appreciate that, Jerry. That is outstanding. I can't thank you enough. I appreciate it.
All right. So, Tom, I'm throwing the question at you. When and why did you join the FBI?
Prior to going to college, I was a scuba diving instructor, and I had aspirations of becoming a commercial deep sea diver. My father said if I went to college, he would then send me to deep diving school. We hear all the time of how teachers can impact the lives of their students, and that's what happened to me. I had a college professor who talked to me about joining the FBI, and they had a close friend who was an agent and always said how much they loved the job and how satisfying it was. So I began researching the avenues of becoming an agent, and I chose the law school route. I went to law school with the sole objective of getting into the FBI. And I can say his friend was exactly right. My career with the FBI was beyond satisfying and more than I could ever thought it could be.
Well, the FBI doesn't have a deep dive team. Did you get to do that as a hobby, as recreation?
I did. I still dive to this day. Some of the SWAT teams had dive teams more on the coast. And then now the ERT has a deep sea diving program now where they use commercial divers. At the time, that was not in existence before I was eligible to apply for that.
So, when did you retire and what are you doing now?
I retired in April of 2022, a little over 2 years ago. And initially, I did some work as a qualified expert drug witness for a large out of state law firm. And then recently became affiliated with Jim's business, Streetwise 360, the law enforcement training and media consulting business, our firm. I've been tasked with exploring some international training opportunities with an emphasis on, as Jim mentioned, informant development, gang investigations, and undercover operations.
I asked you for a headshot and you were reluctant, and we agreed that you did not have to do that. Are you still uncomfortable with sharing your identity? And talk a little bit about how that relates to the undercover roles that you played while you were in the FBI.
Certainly. I was fortunate enough to work a lot of undercover during my 34 years as an agent. In fact, the last 9 years, I was considered a full-time undercover. I didn't have cases assigned. I didn't work informants. I simply traveled both inside and outside the United States to work covert investigations. And it was a myriad of different roles, anywhere from being a fence of stolen property to working outlaw bikers to being a hitman on a murder for hire case. It just was a lot of different roles during some of those roles, and also a lot of drug cases. I would buy a lot of drugs, buy a lot of weapons. And during a lot of those cases, the people that were eventually arrested were angry that they had confided in someone or dealt with someone who was in fact a federal agent. Because of that, because of the safety factor, the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office allowed me to often, if I had to testify, to cover my face and testify in a different name, never using my true name. And yes, there are still concerns. I had threats made against me during my career by a handful of individuals that are still obviously out there. And due to that fact, I don't use my likeness or my face on any social media or any kind of platform.
Well, I can understand that. I like to give my guests the last word. So, whatever you want to talk about, this is your opportunity to make sure that the listeners get to hear from you. Jim, could you go first?
First, I'd like to thank the case agent that spearheaded and ran this entire case. His first name's Joel. The initial for his last name is B. He's currently employed with the Bureau still, so I don't want to fully identify him, but I just want to acknowledge him and the great job that he did in this entire case, because it was very complex and a lot of moving parts. So I just wanted to thank him. And also, Jerry, I want to thank you for just providing the opportunity for Tom and myself to share this story, to discuss this story, because it's a foreign concept to a lot of people out there. They don't realize the type of people that are out there walking amongst us. So I appreciate the platform to share this story. I'll end with this. I just want to say it was a great working relationship between FBI and Homeland Security investigations. I'm just proud of being able to be a part of it. And I think it was a great investigation.
Tom, your last words?
Thank you. I want to echo some of Jim's words. This was a fantastic case, and it involved a lot of people, agents, support people, everyone coming together to make this thing work smoothly. There were obviously times where there was concern, and the case agent, who I trusted completely, gave me peace of mind. He was always communicating to me, letting me know what was going on, and that helped tremendously in bringing this case to an end and taking it in the right direction, I feel. But as my last word, I want to say this job, it was an amazing ride. Usually aboard a Harley. It was full of adventure inside and outside the country. I left the FBI with many friendships, including Jim, who I count as a very dear friend, memories, and enough stories to fill a book. I enjoyed sharing one of those with you today.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, you'll find a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com, where you'll find photos of Tom Blades, sort of, and Jim Weber, and links to court documents about this murder for hire case and several case-related images. In the show notes, there are also links to other FBI Retired Case File Review episodes featuring murder for hire cases. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist, where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.